Hey Shane, welcome to part 4 as we build our new adjustable razor. And guys, I'm sorry, this one's long overdue. No really good excuse. Let's just say I'm better at making razors than I am at making YouTube videos. The good news is that even though it's been 4 or 5 weeks since our last update, we've been doing a lot of work on the razor itself. So the razor development is outpacing our updates, which is better than the other way around. So today, before we get to the technical updates on V4, I first want to give you a quick real-time update of where we are on this product in terms of development, when's it going to come to the market. And then we will dive into a top-down look at some of the stuff we're working on with V4 so you can see exactly where the project is headed. So in real time, we are at about mid-June, and we've been working the last few weeks over pretty minor details. We're really trying to get the razor production ready. So we've been working on really fine technical details, like what are our tolerances going to be? How do we get this thing production ready? How do we engineer and design our fixturing so that we can produce this at pretty large scale? What do we need to do for titanium versus stainless steel? And how do we get those final details just right so that it feels perfect in hand, that it looks exactly the way we want it to? And that's where we're at in real time. I don't have an ETA for when we will actually have this product available, but we're getting pretty close to hitting the green light on production. So I don't see any reason why it won't be ready and available for sale this summer. Perhaps if we're lucky in July. August seems more likely. Things always get delayed. But we are now looking beyond early product development and really looking at how do we get this thing production ready. We'll be going over that more in detail, of course, as we progress in our update videos. But I want to let you know that we're still moving, even though the videos are a bit behind. We also have a name that I will be announcing. I'm not sure when. That might be when we launch, or it might be as we go. I'm not sure if that's one of the things that I want to kind of give away earlier, or I want to keep in the back pocket. But I've also been using the razor constantly. We have some testers as well, and man, I can't say enough good things about this thing. I think you are really going to like it, and I can't wait to show you where the razor is today, especially with the handle, which has been deep in development. We now have the right tooling and equipment to be able to make the handles. So the next update will be a lot of handle stuff in that one, which is a really, obviously, pretty important part of the razor, and that's what really makes it whole. But today we're going to go into some of the tweaks and changes that we made for V4 coming from V3. So without further ado, let's jump into V4 of our new adjustable razor. All right, so here's where we left off. This is V3. So with V3, if you recall, we did a prototype base plate with some of the engravings to kind of have an example of that. And we had our first fully properly engraved numbers here on the knob. But with this knob, the issue is we don't really have that much grip. So these engravings for the numbers actually are pretty flimsy for grip. They're pretty shallow, so they don't really provide any sufficient grip. And the knob generally is pretty short. That makes it tough to grip, especially when your hands are wet and especially with the handle installed. So we knew that we needed to thicken this up. And for V4, it's really all about the knob. So here is V4. Now you're gonna have to ignore a little bit of the engravings here in V4 because it's pretty ugly, but this is just the knob that we happen to have installed on this. Now first, the obvious thing about the knob is that it is taller. Thicker. And the reason for that is so we could add a little grip here on the bottom. Now I'm going to show you in a second that we have played with a lot of different configurations for this kind of grip surface. This one is a pretty lazy like hatch pattern. Not meant at all to be aesthetic, just meant to provide us grip. Now the knob is of utmost importance for a few reasons. And it's by far the most important part of this design. The knob does many things all at one time. First, obviously, it indicates your adjustment. So it's the actual mechanism that you use to choose your setting. So that's incredibly important. So it has to do that well. Second is it holds everything together. So the knob is what is connected to the top plate, and that keeps the bottom plate sandwiched in between. And so the knob has to also hold everything together. The knob also is the interface that you touch. So you have to like the way it feels. You also have to like the way it looks. It has to have an aesthetic to it. It also has to have just the right amount of tension. And so this is something we spent a lot of time on. And I think we finally got it right for V5. The tension is so important because you want this to turn freely, but you don't want it to turn too freely. You don't want it to be loose. And the reason why is specifically for this design, the handle locks onto the knob. So if the knob is too easy to turn, then when you tighten on the handle tightening down, that friction from the handle onto this part of the knob will actually cause the knob to rotate as you tighten it. And then again, to rotate the other direction as you loosen it. So if you set it to setting 5 like we have here, you tighten on the handle, as you tighten it down, you might bump it over to 6. That's obviously a problem. But if you make it too tight, then it's not a pleasure to use, right? You want it to be able to be easily turned. You can see this one on V4 here. It's actually a little tight, especially as you get up to 8 and 9. It's a little easier down here at 1 and 2, and that's going to be the case, right? As we compress that spring, we're going to get more tension. So it's expected that in the higher registers, we have a little bit more tension. And so that's another difficult thing to do. We have to make it so that it is easy to turn and not too easy across the entire range. So to do that, we're really playing with the threads themselves and the basically the tightness of the threads in the bottom plate. And we actually have, let me grab them here, bunch of different knobs that we've been working on. You can see we've been playing with different sorts of grip patterns for the bottom because, again, we want it to be easy to grip. But as you guys know, we don't do knurling here at Blackland. Now, the things you won't be able to tell are all of the differences in the threads. So we played a lot with the details on threads. And you'll recall that in our last video, I told you these next updates are going to be less exciting. And this is why. It's because, right in front of me, we have about 10 different, 8 or something different knobs. I guess I can't count. But we have many more that aren't even, shown here. And each one of these has some subtle differences. What we're really trying to figure out is a few things. We have to get the engagement correct down here, the part that you actually touch, the part that you actually see. This is the part that extends below the bottom plate, of course. We have to make sure that is obviously perfect. But we also have to get the details in here correct. This is the hidden area that gets tucked into the bottom plate. Now, there's a lot going on in here for such a small space. First at the top, you may not be able to see it because it's incredibly small, but there's a tiny little groove at the top there, and that's where the O-ring sits. That little groove, that little tiny overhang, is what holds this whole thing together. And so we have to get that absolutely perfect. It has to be snug, but again, like all things, not too snug because we still need the knob to be able to rotate, and it has to be strong enough that when you try to back this out, like on this razor, if you try to back it out, turning as hard as I can, the thing still has to hold together. So we've been working to get that just right. But there's a lot of magic also going on in the threads, and that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today. That's where we spent a lot of time. This might seem like a pretty simple thing, but it's actually become really difficult. So there are 2 or 3 real issues with the threads that we are tackling. And I shouldn't call them issues, I should call them features or details. The first is the pitch. So pitch just refers to basically if I turn the knob one full time, how much Z direction movement do we get? So in other words, when I turn this knob, if I turn it one setting, how much is the difference between setting 1 and setting 2, and setting 3 and setting 4? Pitch just refers to how many threads there are per inch. That's one version. Also, just the distance between the threads. And obviously, the more threads you have per distance, threads per inch, high thread per inch means that like you get really fine adjustments. So every turn, you won't actually get too much movement in the Z. A really coarse pitch, you might have really aggressive movement in the Z. And so what we want is for each move, each setting adjustment to be a meaningful change in gap and blade exposure, but not too much. And this is actually pretty difficult because imagine that we set the distance to change 0.15 millimeters every time you turn it. That's actually not what we did here, but let's say that's true. At setting 1, maybe your gap is 0.3. Well, going from 0.3 to 0.45 is pretty significant. And if everything's linear, then at going from 0.8 to 0.95 is far less severe of a change than going from setting 1 to 2. And so that's something you have to play with, is you want it to be meaningful, but not so much that at the lower settings, it becomes a relatively huge jump. So we spent a lot of time playing with pitch to get it just right and to give us a really broad range of adjustment. Like I told you from the start of this project, we want our adjustable razor to cover everyone. We want it to be very mild, and we want it to be really efficient, all in one thing. We want people to only use settings 1 and 2, and we want other people to only be using settings 8 and 9. You should not love every setting of this razor. If that's the case, then maybe you just are really versatile, but more likely it means that we've made a too narrow of a band. We want a really wide band so that your perfect setting is pretty far away from someone else's perfect setting. There should be a sweet spot for you, and it's going to be different for each person. And so to do that, we had to adjust the pitch. So what we actually did is made a custom pitch. There are a lot of standard pitch size. You are probably familiar with M5, for example. M5 typically has a 0.8 pitch. You'll see like M5 times 0.8. That's the standard thread for a 3-piece razor, by the way. And that 0.8 means the pitch. That's just 0.8 millimeters between each thread. And we actually had to make a custom pitch for this. And so we made, as you can see, a lot of different pitches. Some were too aggressive in that they moved the bottom plate too much between settings. And some weren't enough, such that there was too little movement and the band became too narrow. So a lot of tinkering with that. But that's only part of the story. The other thing we have to get right is that tightness, like I talked about, the tension, where it's comfortable to use, easy to turn, but not too easy. And that just required a whole bunch of trial and error. Simply, do we make these threads fit really snugly together, or do we make them kind of loose? What is the sweet spot of tightness versus looseness? And this might sound like something that is really stupid. You might just have thought that, hey, we should make every thread as tight as possible. Like I think I mentioned last time, technically a thread with zero allowance between the male and female part is a thread that won't move. There always has to be a little bit of wiggle. And so we wanted to get the wiggle just right so that it's a really comfy turn. I think we actually got it a little snug on this one. This other example here, which I think is like a V4.5, this one's actually a little loose, but a little better. So we've been trying to find the Goldilocks zone on that. For V5, I think we found it. We'll address that. But this is what we've been spending kind of all our time on, is these little details. The other thing we've been spending time on, as you can probably see, is grip. Grip and engraving. We've been trying to practice our engraving. One of the things you'll notice about the engraving is that the numbers spiraled down. So the gap from, you might not be able to see this very well. The gap between like the 7 sits lower than the 6, which sits lower than the 5, which sits lower than the 4, so on. I really hope this shows up. And the reason is that as you thread the knob into the handle, it's actually going to sit up higher. Sorry, as you thread the knob into the bottom plate, it's actually going to sit higher into the bottom plate. And so that means that actually less knob is exposed to the higher settings. And so because the knob is sitting higher up, we want the indicator to always be pointing at the top of the number. And so the numbers have to spiral down. It's actually just a cool little detail that we have. And so we've been trying to get that productionized and get that just right. And we've also, again, been playing with that grip. So we have some kind of ugly knurling that we were playing with just to get a quick and dirty test. And then we've been getting a bit more Blackland style with these kind of scallops and trying to figure out, okay, what is comfortable in the hand, what is effective in that it provides sufficient grip with wet hands and for people of all types, and what matches our aesthetic. And that's actually been pretty tough because this is a really small space. We have this like a really aggressive one here, and we have a little bit of a milder one here. Let's see where it is. On this guy, we thought these scallops might be effective. Turned out that these are actually kind of useless, even though I think they look quite nice. So it's just been a lot of playing with playing with our knobs. Wow. And we've gotten very close. This is also coincides, like I talked about last time, with getting a better handle on our new mill turn. Well, I say ours, but on our neighbor's mill turn. And our neighbor Tyler at Kinetic CNC has been getting more and more proficient. And you'll see a lot of these. There's like some machining errors in here, and this is all part of the game, all part of the process. So now with V4, we have our pitch figured out, and I'm not going to reveal that pitch because that's a little bit of a trade secret because it is custom. So it won't be able to be threaded on to any standardized threading that you might have. And so we took some time to develop a custom pitch that I won't give away. And we've also, for the bottom plate, we've just been working on little tiny refinements that I don't even think you'll see. You can feel them though. The base plate is so smooth. The safety bar just feels great. These corners we really worked on softening to still give it that kind of angular appearance, but feel incredibly smooth as you roll over your face, obviously. And we've really been working on productionizing the bottom plate. You'll notice we don't have engraving here. That's because of the last engraving on this guy, on V3. This was done on just kind of a specific fixturing for a 3-axis, but we'll actually be making this bottom plate part on a 4-axis mill. And so that will allow us to engrave all in kind of one operation on each side. We didn't do that for this one. We're still working on getting that 4th axis capability set up and kind of optimized, and we should have that for you for, I think, V6. We should have that rolling out. But where we're at now, again, this is a pretty ugly one. This was actually done before the mill turn. It was done on a different machine. I think our most up-to-date knob that we have here is probably this one. This one's pretty close to what you'll see on V5. I don't want to show you guys V5, but because this video is so late, I kind of feel bad, and I want to give you a little sneak peek of V5. This is sort of where we're headed. You can see these numbers are crisp. They're very clear. The lighting in here is a little suboptimal. You're getting that reflection. In person, they're pretty clear. I know we have some customers with older eyes or people who don't see quite as well, and I think these are pretty good. They are big, they're pretty obvious, and it should be quite clear as far as these things go. Of course, it's a balancing act between making the knob compact, which is part of the kind of mission statement of the razor, and making these numbers big enough to be legible. We'd love for them to each be size 200 font, but this is about what we can fit in the space without sacrificing too much room. I'm not going to show it here, but we also figured out how to disassemble this thing, which was a whole engineering feat and required further refinement, again, of the knob, specifically how this overhang, that groove, how that is cut in its exact shape. You might not think there's much to be done there, but there was. And so we're really about the details now. We're actually pretty close. In V5, or in part 5 of this video at least, we should have a handle for you, which I'm extremely excited about. This is a handle unlike anything that's ever been made. And I think that'll be huge. It'll be really nice. In V5, we'll kind of show the whole thing coming together. And we're getting really close to production. So I just want to thank you guys for coming along. Let us know what you think. Let us know what you think of the kind of knob direction. Ultimately, I'm quite confident you guys are going to love it. We also, by the way, I forgot about one more thing we have to do. Because when we switched to the mill turn, we realized that there's actually not a way to stop the knob from overclocking. And that's something we want to avoid. Let's see if I can show it here. Yeah, so that's 9 right there. And it's supposed to stop there. But as you can see, it keeps going. Now, there are going to be some of you aggressive Razor fans out there who really are excited. They're like, oh, yay, setting 15. Yeah, that's not going to happen. We're going to cap you off. The issue is that with the knob, to machine these threads, you actually have to cut a relief down here. That's that kind of narrower, neck I'm trying to point at. And that neck means that you can't actually limit where the threads stop. And so we have a kind of clever fix for this that is being worked on right now. And that's another thing we've been trying to tackle. You'll see this one. These grooves at the top here are reflective of the removal tool that we've established. It's basically 3 little fingers that go in, press out the insert clip that fits in there, and it lets you disassemble the whole razor. Anyway, guys, I know this was a long time coming. I hope V4 or part 4 is looking as good to you guys as it is to me. I am incredibly excited. I've been using this razor constantly in some form for weeks, and it is just an incredible joy to use. So I'm really looking forward to updating you guys on part 5. I hope that the distance from part 4 to part 5 is much less than distance from part 3 to part 4. But anyway, I want to thank you guys for following along, and I will catch you in the next video.